Hello everyone and welcome back to BlenderDiplom.com. I'm Gottfried Hofmann and this is another tutorial for the Animation Notes add-on. It's about wiggling individual letters. So this is both a tutorial on wiggle and on separating letters so you can animate them individually. Let's just go right ahead. I'm using Blender 2.77a and the Animation Notes add-on version 1.6. Let me move the default cube to another layer because we're not gonna need it, and select Cycles Render. Next, I'm just adding some text and let me look at it from the top, and let me type letter wiggle. And you see that the upper word has exactly the same amount of letters like the lower word, but it's shorter because the individual letters have different width. And to fix this, I'm gonna use a so-called Monospace Font, where each letter in the font has exactly, or each glyph has exactly the same width. So let's go to Font, and here in Regular, I'm gonna open up my fonts directory. I'm gonna select two levels. This will also look in subdirectories. And then let me look for Mono. And I have quite a few Monospace fonts on my system. With this little icon, I can preview them, and let me select this one down here. So now you see both words have exactly the same width. And this is all we need for preparations. Let's jump over to the Compositing Layout and here Animation Notes. And here I'm gonna look from the top down as well. And the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm creating a new node tree. And here I'm not having any nodes, so let me add one. And that will be Text Object Separate. With this node, I can take a text. Let me simply hit the eyedropper to get the one we have here. And then if I hit update, you see all the letters have been separated. Now there are two things I'd like to adjust. First of all, the letters are a mesh, but I want to change them later on, like adding a bevel and extrusion. So let me switch over to text. Let's hit update again. And there's another thing I'd like to change, and that is the pivot point. If I rotate this T here, you'll see that it will rotate around this small orange dot. And I want it to be in the center. And for this, let me simply switch the origin to geometry, update again. And now if I rotate the T, it's rotating around the orange dot that is now in the center. This is exactly what I want. Now let's animate this. And for this, I'm gonna use Wiggle, Shift A, and Rotation, Euler Wiggle, because I want the letters to rotate. And in order to get the rotation to the objects, we need an Object Transforms Output node. Now let me select Rotation, connect the wiggle to the rotation, and let me show you the effect on the T by using the eyedropper. Now if I animate the evolution, you see the T here wiggling. And I can do this even better by hitting Shift A, Animation, Time Info, and connecting Frame to Evolution. Now if I hit Alt A, you see the T is wiggling. But I want all the letters to wiggle, and I want to do this individually. So we need a kind of system that does this effect here onto each of the letters. And for this, let me first show you how this text objects here, what this is and how this is looking, by connecting text objects here with the output here. And now you see the L is moving, and that's because we have a list, and this node that was automatically inserted gets the first element of the list and passes it on. So now the L is wiggling, and if we go up on the index, then the E is wiggling, and so on. So what we need is a so-called loop, so we can loop over all the elements in the list. And this loop is a so-called subprogram. You can find it here, subprograms, and then loop. Now, this is a new node with a few inputs and, well, it only has outputs. And now what can we place in there? Well, first of all, we can place there this object input of the objects transforms output. So let's connect it here. And this is an iterator because we're gonna do the thing we do have in here to all the objects, which means we're iterating over all the objects. Okay, we got this here, but how do we connect it up here to our text outputs list? Well, for this we need another node, and that is invoke subprogram. Here it is now in the list. It reads my loop, and if you look down here, here it is again, my loop. Let's call this letter wiggle, and now magically the name has changed to letter wiggle. So this is a special node that's used to invoke this loop here, or to run this loop. And let's feed it with the text objects, and now all of the letters are wiggling, but they are all still wiggling all the same. We want an individual wiggle, and for this what we're gonna use is the index here. The index is actually the same thing as the index we had up here. So it's each individual object in the loop will get a number, and this is the number. So if we connect index here to seed here, then each letter will have an individual seed for the wiggle node. That means they will wiggle individually. Pretty cool. And let me also decrease the amplitude to like 20 degrees. So this is actually already the result of this tutorial, so you don't need to watch any further unless you want to find out some interesting things about the wiggle effect, or at least about loops, subprograms, and the separate text object node. And this is what I'm gonna show you right now. The interesting thing is, with animation nodes, we can change the text, like add offset or extrusion or bevel, right inside our node tree. And this is text object output. So this is actually an output node, but we can connect it here in between. And then, for example, I can turn on extrusion and extrude things. And I can also turn on a few other things, like, for example, the bevel depth and bevel resolution. So now let me add some bevel depth, just a little bit, positive value like this, and let's turn up the resolution. So the cool thing about this is that we can change it in here, is we could do two objects, like one as the default object and one as an outline, and create it right up here. And for this, let me first duplicate this, and then for us to see the effect a little better, I'm gonna add two materials. So I have a random object selected and go up here to materials, hit new, and then add another one, new, and let's call this white, and this here red. So let me select everything and then red. And for the red one, I'm gonna just choose a red color, and down here in the settings, viewport color, let's copy this, paste this, and then let's first give the red material to the upper one, red, and update. And I've not yet updated the lower one. This is gonna be the white one. And the reason for this is because I want the upper and the lower one to have different extrusions and different bevel depth. And to get this, to get two different extrusions or bevel depths, I need to set extrude and bevel depth as parameters for my loop input. Now I have them up here, and now for example I can do here an extrusion of 0.15 and here maybe just an extrusion of 0.1, but in return increase the bevel depth here a little bit to like say 0.5. And now if I hit update here and here, you see down here, pretty cool that now we have an outline because we actually now have two objects, that one and that one. So you could even wiggle the extrusion depth if you wanted to with Animation Nerds. So you have a lot of control over everything, but there is one thing you can't control with nodes right here, or at least not perfectly. You could do with a more complicated setup, but let me show you how to do it way simpler, and that is the spacing of the letters. Because this text object created a list of individual letters right at the position they had before, we cannot increase the spacing easily. And for this, I would say use the original object, and that is in the outliner. You can see it. Let's go to outliner. And the original text object is here, it's hidden, but we can change things like letter spacing. So let's increase this to 1.25 for example, and then hit update here and here. And now the letter spacing has updated. Pretty cool, and they are still wiggling. And the extremely cool thing about this is, for example, we could turn on the visibility again, select it, and change it to, for example, giggle, and then once I hit update on both, they have updated here as well. So this is actually a pretty cool way to edit the text, and like if you have multiple outlines, this really saves you some time because otherwise you would have needed to edit two texts. And you can even, if you want to, convert the text to a mesh, which I didn't do here because I'm doing extrusion right here, but you could do this and we would still be able to edit it because the original text is a hidden object, which you can still change. Okay, so this is it about loops, subprograms, wiggle, and separating text objects. But because some people ask me to always do a tutorial completely, in the next part I'm gonna show you how to make this look really cool using cycles. For that, let me first create a very simple lighting setup without this point lamp here, but instead two planes, each rotated slightly around the x-axis, scaled along the x-axis, and move to a position above and below of our text object. But first let me give it a new material. I'm gonna use an emission shader, and then let's duplicate it, move it down here and rotate it along the x direction again. And then let me hit Alt-G, Alt-R for the camera to clear location and rotation. Move it upwards and look through it and position it. And I guess I can go a little further upwards and like this. And then let me turn the world completely black. And let's see how this is looking already. Yeah, this is already pretty cool. Actually, I guess we could keep the lighting like that if we want to. It's already looking pretty nice, but let me do a few adjustments like increasing the strength. And then let's work on the material. For the white one, I'm simply keeping it diffuse. But for the red one, I would like to have a few shiny outlines. Like, let's choose, like here, let's take a look at the R. And because this way I can create some nice highlights. So shader, mix shader, and shader glossy. And I'm not gonna use anything like you might expect like Fresnel. Let me just use the factor here and decrease the roughness quite a bit. And now we have a nice plasticky look with these highlights here. And the last thing I'd like to add is a few more extra highlights coming from the top. And for this, I'm going to duplicate this one, Shift D, C, rotate it back, and create a different material, emission.top. And here I'm also gonna SYY decrease here the size along the y-axis, and then let me just add an array modifier, but the relative offset in y, not x. So if I increase this here, you see that no, the top one is x, this one is y, this one is c, and let's create like a little space in between. Then I can increase the count, and this will look pretty cool, but I don't want to see it in the camera, so cycle setting, ray visibility, camera off. And if I would look from the top here, this would also not, the part below would not be visible. So let me go maximum draw type wire. And now we can skip through here and see that the shining part on our letter giggle here is actually changing while the letters are moving, and this is exactly what I want, to give the impression of that they're moving back and forth, to add a little bit to that. So next thing would be the background. And for that I'm selecting the world, use nodes, and I want the camera to see something different than the letters. And for this we have input light path, and there on the top we have is camera ray. But for this to work, we need a mix shader, so let's shader mix. Let's duplicate the background down here and choose a color, just so you can see the effect. Now, when I use is camera ray, the background will become brighter, and all the text objects, nothing in there will, so the background will not light our text object. So in case I change the color, only the background will change, but not our text object. So this is exactly what I want. Now the good question, how did I get those stripes? Well, for this I'm using texture, wave texture. And if I connect the color right here to the background color, you see that the stripes are somewhat more like circular. And that's because our background is like a giant sphere. So the default coordinates are of no use here, but we can change this as well. Input texture coordinate, and there we have window. And window is basically what I see, everything like both the camera, but also this virtual window. So you see here. And so this is now a projection that's basically flat onto our window, and this is what I'm gonna use. But let me change the color using converter color ramp in two ways. First of all, I want this to be not so much like bands, but more like stripes. So let's move those two stops closer together. And then I'd like to have colors back in here. So let me select color here and another color there. So also something bluish but darker. So here we have it, and I'd still like to have a little more like in the background things should fade out. Let me turn on border, and for this I'm using another texture, and that is texture gradient texture. Where is it? Here. Let me switch to quadratic sphere, use window again, and then let's put the factor into the strength. And now you see here like it's like a light is shining, but it's shining to the bottom left. That's where 0, 0 is in window coordinates. So we need to move them, and this can be done using converter, the vector mapping. Let me select texture and then change the location in X to 0.5. Now it should be in the middle, and in Y as well. And by changing the size, the scale, we can make this smaller or bigger, and 0.8 is good, I guess. So you can actually do basic compositing right inside the cycles, which is pretty cool, so we don't need to composite those stripes in there later on. And one thing I'd still like to do is I want to use mapping up here as well. And for this I can both change the scale of our stripes, of course, but that's not what I want. So let me change the scale to 1. But instead I'd like to keyframe the location so the stripes are moving. So if I change X, you see that the stripes are moving here, like from top right to bottom left. So let me insert a keyframe, right click, insert single keyframe, and then go to the graph editor. Then I will insert a keyframe again, like 1.5 maybe. Right click, insert single keyframe, and here let me hit T, linear, so the interpolation becomes linear, and then channel, extrapolation mode, linear as well. And now I have moving stripes, and the speed on which they are moving and the direction I can simply change by moving this here, this second point up or downwards. So now they should be moving from top right to bottom left and rather slowly. So this is exactly what I want. And this is actually also the final result. So now we're ready to render and have some fun using wiggling in individual letters. I hope you learned a little bit or quite a lot. And if you make something cool with the knowledge you get in this tutorial, please show us. Go to BlenderDiplom.com into the comment section and post your images or videos, because we're always super eager to see what you do with the knowledge we share in our tutorials. And of course, subscribe to our newsletter, subscribe to YouTube, and do try this at home.